Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us at this Finance Watch panel on the digital euro design choices and trade-offs. My name is Catherine Carlson. I am a journalist covering EU financial services policy for MLEX here in Brussels, and I'll be moderating today's session. This is a great time to have this panel. It's a significant moment for the discussions around the digital euro. The ECB, as we all know, announced earlier this month that it would move forward with the next development phase for the currency, a 2-year preparation phase, including testing and experimentation, and selecting providers to develop the platform and infrastructure. We also can see legislative negotiations continuing on the European Commission's proposal, which establishes the legal basis for a potential future digital euro. Now, in those discussions, issues around the features of a potential digital euro are top of mind. Lawmakers are keen to balance consumer protection, technical progress, financial stability, and the EU's competitiveness as the project moves forward. Questions do remain over how consumers will respond to the digital euro, whether it will be too popular and pose a threat to existing modes of payment, or not popular enough to justify the resources expended on the project. Considerations also arise over the design of a potential digital euro, how this will be accessed by citizens and in which format, who will be responsible for distributing it, and how fee structures for services could be designed, as well as how the digital euro can protect individuals' privacy while also countering risks of money laundering and terrorist financing. So those are a few of the big issues that we'll be diving into today in our panel. So let me introduce you to the panelists. Today, we are welcoming Jan Sijsens, Head of the Digital Finance Unit at DG FISMA at the European Commission, Ellie Beiruti, Chairman of the European Payment Institutions Federation, Agustin Reina, Director of Legal and Economic Affairs at the European Consumer Organization BEUC, and Anne-Sophie Parent from Age Platform Europe. And just a housekeeping note, as with the previous panel, please do submit your questions using the Q&A function of the webinar. We'll put those through at the end. When you're asking a question, please do identify yourself with your name and organization, and I'll read them out at the end to the panelists. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'm going to come to Jan first. Big question on distribution of a potential future digital euro. Consumer accessibility is obviously a big concern. How can we make sure that a future digital euro would be universally available to a citizen who might not have a mobile phone or a bank account?
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine, and indeed thanks to FISMA, Christian, and the Finance Watch team for organizing this panel today. A lot of interesting and exciting questions. So indeed, on the distribution side, I think the overall, let's say, challenge is indeed to make the digital euro, let's say, widely available. And that has two aspects. One is, of course, to reach the large amount of the public in a way, consumers, but of businesses. And on the other hand, of course, also to be available indeed for, let's say, financially more excluded or digitally excluded. So that's why from the Commission side, I think we, let's say, suggested the two pillars here. On the one hand, we know that the overwhelming majority of Europeans do have an account with a commercial bank. And probably if you want to make the digital euro easily accessible for them, it makes a lot of sense that indeed the commercial banks actually, with which people have customer relationships, actually also provide the digital euro. Very much as today, they are indeed the point of call for getting cash in whatever form you use it. And that's basically indeed where, let's say, the first institute proposing that, let's say, the distribution of the digital euro should indeed be run through, should be carried out by indeed by financial institutions. Now I think the second pillar is, of course, indeed to, let's say, also then address all, let's say, more excluded people. And I think there are different elements here. One is, of course, just the, let's say, indeed the digital access and limitations here. So in that sense, it is important that indeed financial institutions, as they distribute the euro, also make it available to indeed people who may not have a mobile phone, let's say, are not kind of able to use online banking. So I think that's a challenge, I think, both for distributors, but also for the ECB itself, that there need to be, let's say, so-called form factors and ways of accessing the digital euro, which are so accessible also to people who do not have indeed a mobile phone connection. And I think the second aspect is indeed then, let's say, to approach, let's say, all those people who maybe have particular difficulties indeed in using, but still need some help in a way, particular help. But there are also, of course, those Europeans who do not have a bank account. Here from the European Commission side, we have proposed on the one hand indeed to extend the Payments Account Directive, the right to a basic bank account here to the euro. And on the other hand, we have also proposed indeed that in each member state there should be one public entity which indeed as a fallback actually would also make available the euros. So I think we are trying really here to have different let's say approaches and different avenues so to make sure that indeed the euro is basically the most accessible to all the different stakeholders.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come to Agustin now for the same question. How can we make sure that the digital euro will be universally available? What kind of features do we need to see here to really make this accessible?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you very much to Finance Watch for organizing this very, very interesting discussion. I think that's the core question that we are trying to address. And taking one step back and just for the audience, we are very supportive of the project, but the success of the project will depend entirely on its design and whether it's going to be used by people, whether it's going to be designed with people and consumers in mind. And in the previous panels, it was already mentioned that here we were talking is in essence about a new public payment method. And for us, it's in this regard important to bear in mind that here we're preparing for the future. And by preparing for the future, we mean that understanding that it's not going to be a take up from one day to the other. The markets, they need to adapt to it. Consumers will need to adapt to it. But from the very beginning, we need to ensure that this is designed in a way that it becomes widely accessible for consumers, and is also accepted by the merchants. So, going to your question, that depends on how we're going to foresee in the legislation the take up and the introduction of the digital euro, likely to be in stages, and that's kind of the approach also that the Commission has been taken. But something that we also need to consider is that consumers today have a wide choice of payment methods. We need to acknowledge that. Payment methods that have been provided, by private entities, and bearing that in mind, we need to think about what is going to trigger consumers to go for the digital euro or to use it more. I'm not a big fan of this idea that people will massively go to the digital euro that will create macroprudential concerns. I think that we need to also bear in mind that people have already access to electronic means of payments, and therefore it will be an extra effort to say how this is going to differentiate from what already exists. And here, clearly, for us, what is important is to try to replicate as much as possible the benefit of cash, being on privacy, being on accessibility, inclusiveness, so on, so forth. So on that note, I think that credit institutions will play an extremely important role here. There is no doubt whatsoever. There will be, of course, and there are benefits of public distribution, but also we need to acknowledge that our infrastructure is already in place. But I think that what is important to bear in mind is that the idea of introducing the digital euro, irrespective of whether it is distributed by credit institutions or not, or maybe potentially e-money and payment institutions as well, is that here we're also trying to cut dependencies from existing credit card schemes. And I think that here is where there will be an important, I think, at the end, added value, not only for consumer, but for the economy in general. Because the less dependencies you create, the higher chances for more diversity and choice for consumers.
Thank you. I'm sure, Ellie, you're keen to jump in there. Any thoughts on that question?
Well, I have many thoughts on what has been raised so far. So let me first say that in terms of the digital euro, and for us as payment institutions and electronic money institutions, so the non-banking sector, I believe like the first thing that I would like to highlight is that we would like to take part in this project. We are very supportive of the digital euro because we see it, you know, as bringing something maybe new to the market, and we want, you know, as innovative players, you know, we want to take part in this. And you know, I know now when I listen to Augustine, I think, you know, he doesn't have, when he mentions credit institutions, he has in mind more the PSPs, more the payment service providers. So it's really enlarge, you know, who could be distributing, because I think this would be very beneficial for consumers, you know, to take advantage of the different, you know, offers that could be out there and not only rely on banks or credit institutions. So I hope that, you know, we can talk more about payment service providers rather than only banks or credit institutions as such. So this is the first point that was important. I know in the first design of the ECB, or at least, you know, when the ECB was first, you know, discussing the issue, we were a bit concerned as a non-banking sector, because we obviously, you know, we're afraid like we would be cut off, you know, the distribution, and this would be only a privilege given, I would say, to banks. Hopefully, you know, this has changed over the time, and now, you know, in the proposal of the Commission, this is well mentioned there, that's, you know, PSPs are there, you know, to distribute, which I think would also be beneficial not only for competition but also for consumers at the end of the day. In order for this to happen, I would like to highlight, you know, one particular aspect, which is, you know, the multiple wallet versus the one wallet per citizen. Here again, I have to say, like, thank you to Jan and to the Commission for taking into account a very competitive solution, which is the multiple wallets rather than only the one wallet approach that the ECB was pushing for. And this is, again, very important for competition, very important since the beginning to give consumers different choices within the holding limit. So we're not, you know, putting into jeopardy the holding limit. And this is definitely it would be more challenging, but definitely also possible, as the ECB themselves acknowledge. We would not favor, you know, a sort of two steps approach. We would favor, like, since the beginning, since we start, to get there on the same level playing field as banks, because this is the only way we can offer a lot of different and hopefully, you know, competitive solutions to consumers. And I would join, however, you know, what Augustine said, and this would be my last point in this round. The biggest challenge, I think, for the digital euro going forward is definitely, you know, the issue of adoption by consumers, because, you know, as Augustine also rightly said, there are a lot of methods and payment methods that are out there. There is no clear business case why, you know, digital euro is I would say, is responding to a need from a commercial perspective. This is probably more coming, you know, to solve an issue, a political issue, which is very important, of sovereignty in payments, of you know, of strategic autonomy, etc. But from a business perspective, the solutions are out there. You have many solutions out there. So for the consumers to adopt the digital euro is going to be the biggest challenge. But I'll pause here and continue later the discussion.
Thank you very much. A lot of interesting points raised there. And Sophia, I'd like to bring you in here. So Augustine's raising an interesting point about accessibility by design built into the digital euro. You obviously represent a particular demographic of consumers. How can we make this thing accessible for the people who may or may not be using it if it is released?
Well, we will have to find a solution, because I remind you that the European Accessibility Act will have to be enforced or implemented on new financial services, such as the digital euro, from June 25. So there is no other option than making the digital euro as accessible to the widest group possible. And not only, it does not concern a small group of population. Actually, if you look at different studies that have been done, including in countries which are highly digital, it is between 10 to 40% of the population, at least, who struggle with the current offer of digital retail payment means. So some people may be using a smartphone every day, but they do not feel confident using it to make payments. And unfortunately, the indicators on financial inclusion are based on indicators which do not reflect the reality people are facing every day. Financial inclusion and digital financial inclusion is actually decreasing more and more. this is said by people who have been comfortable using them and just, for example, are not so sure anymore about being acute enough to spot a fraud, for example. So the digital euro will have to fill a gap that exists for the moment, which is with the increasing digitalization of the retail payment means, is leaving out a bigger group of population. So that's something we are very, very pleased to see really taken as a high priority, both by the ECB and the European Commission. We see also the fact that this is connected with a better understanding and acknowledgement of the legal status of cash. The digital euro will go hand in hand with cash, because this is what we are facing and struggling with today. Even people who are very digitally and financially literate are struggling today. It's because of the lack of bank branches are closing, ATMs are closing, and then shops are doing whatever they can or whatever they find most interesting. And that's where for us, making sure that the digital euro will be easy to use, even for those who do not have digital skills, but also for all those who may not be accepted as a client by private PSPs. This is foreseen. There would be the public authorities will other mandate, for example, non-profit PSP to cater and offer onboarding for those people. But it will also leave much greater choice to the consumers, because you may be happy with your current bank for the services they are giving you, but you do not necessarily want them to be taking care of your digital euro account. There will be, if it goes as being discussed for the moment, it will be much more flexible, and there will be also safety by device. So that means you can opt as a consumer for something that is very safe, use the offline or online. It will also enable and reinforce all of us. I mean, that the retail payment ecosystem will become more resilient, because when something goes wrong with existing digital payment means, as it happens every day, not very long ago in Belgium and France, just 2 days ago, the digital euro will become an option. You will be able to pay offline without having to run to the first ATM, which becomes empty in 5 minutes when a problem arises somewhere. So for us, it's we think that there is definitely a business case for the digital euro. We don't think it is going to create so much instability. On the contrary, people will learn how to use it wisely. It was very well described by Jan earlier. We think that this indeed will improve a lot the situation and the resilience of our retail payment system. Thank you.
Thank you. So Jan, this question is coming up a lot, this issue of public versus private distribution models. This is a panel about trade-offs. I mean, what are your thoughts here?
I think I mean, it is. There's not a. I would say we'd love to see it more. We don't see it as a public versus private, but we'd love to see it more like a public and private as a joint undertaking, basically. And I think we're probably not yet fully there. I think at this moment is also there's still a lot of discussion about, let's say, one against the other, digital euro against private payment solutions. Let's say distribution through banks against, let's say, other options. I think in the end it will all have to work together. And I mean, we know that basically the majority of Europeans basically have, I mean, they have private banking solutions, which they, I mean, and are partners with whom they work quite well. So we really need to work with that on that basis. At the same time, it's of course clear that the digital euro is it's public money, so it is not there because let's say payment service providers think this is the most profitable solution. It is in a way there to make sure that public money is there in the digital age. And so I think we need to find a bit here the right balance as well, that let's say I mean, private institutions take their role in distributing the digital euro. On the other hand, they are also, let's say, remunerated for that to a certain extent, basically, so that indeed they also have an incentive to do this well, and to, let's say, to put the digital euro really in the showcase in the front and not just in the back office and only make it available if the consumer asks twice or 3 times. So I think that's a bit the challenge we have here. I think that there needs to be something in for everybody in a way, and I think it can work. And I think we will probably get there, but probably still some way to go.
And I'm going to come to Ellie here. Do you agree? Do you think this relationship is going to be so harmonious and cooperative going forward? And what are the challenges that the private sector is going to face with taking this project through? I'd also like to introduce, I mean, Jan, you raise an interesting point, which is the fee structures. Who is going to be charging for these services? How is it going to work? What is fair for industry? What is fair for consumers? Let's all weigh in here, but Ellie first.
Right. No, listen, Catherine. So we always look for harmony. So hopefully we can achieve it. Now speaking more concretely, I mean, about the fee structure. I have 2 points, I would like to highlight here. The first one is that we believe like consumers should not pay for the basic service, of the digital euro. This is, if not, like, again, this could be another hurdle for adoption. So that's the first point I think that is worth mentioning. Then, the other question is like, who will pay for that? And then you are left like with 2 options, either the merchants or the public authority providing the service, right? These are the only 2 options. And again, for me, what is really important is that, you should not start with this sort of like price caps. Once you are launching the project, you should, just again, make sure like a lot of services could be proposed around it, and then if that there is a something that is not functioning properly, then price caps could eventually be adopted at a certain point in time. But for the time being, I think starting with the view that we'll start straightforward with like price caps and a model like the fee structure that is similar a bit to what we see in the 4-party scheme model of cards is not the right way forward.
Yeah, and you're the legislator here. Thoughts on price caps?
Well, I mean, I think we see that a bit differently in the sense that I think we have full trust indeed in, and we think competitive forces are essential and market forces are necessary. But we do see that, let's say, the digital euro will, if it is supposed to be widely accessible, it will have to be accepted indeed and also be offered by all merchants, for example. That means that merchants, shop owners, and others will need to cooperate with payment service providers, actually, and in that sense, they don't have any other choice. So now leaving then the pricing fully, even only initially, fully in the hands of indeed the payment service providers, say you can charge whatever you want, that would be a bit of a difficult situation then for the merchants, and that is why I think we have proposed indeed that there should be some let's say principles enshrined in regulation and some monitoring. Now, having said this, I think the principles we proposed are not, let's say, neither rocket science nor extremely constraining in a way. I think we have proposed the principles which any private company would also apply. First of all, look at your costs. Second of all, look at what competitors you have, basically, what are comparable means of payment. And in that sense, basically, probably then, I mean, the outcome of this, let's say, transparency exercise would also, let's say, the regulation, I think, may probably be where, I mean, if the market works properly, it would end up anyway. But from our side, I think we do see the need from the beginning, indeed, to also have a certain framework for the pricing in place, precisely because, indeed, it is a product which we are requiring any merchant, any the most significant merchant in Europe to offer. And so then I think also, indeed, it's important that basically merchants can access also on their side, indeed, the necessary services at a reasonable price.
I'm going to bring Agustin in here now. So if we're talking about fee structures, from the consumer perspective, what are you guys hoping for? What looks fair for European consumers in terms of fees?
Well, that's related to the question of how inclusive do we want the digital euros to be? So that will have, any fees that you might apply will have a direct impact on this. So of course, we think that the certain basic features should be free of charge. That is kind of essential to ensure consumer take up. And we can also forget that it's through fees schemes, you can create, disadvantages between the different payment systems. So of course, the more expensive the digital euro is to offer, less attractive it will be for consumers to take it and even merchants to offer it, or to engage in practices that will steer consumers to using other means of payment. So I think that from the consumer perspective, it's fundamental to ensure that it's free of charge, at least on the basic features. And we cannot forget that we have similar conversations in the past in relation, for example, to basic payment accounts. Today, according to EU law, consumers should be able to access a payment account free of charge. I don't think this discussion is any different. So from that point of view, I think that it have to be free of charge for consumers, at least on the basic features.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really interesting point here about how we're going to foster any kind of popularity for this new project. People don't know about it. They don't necessarily understand it. It might be technical and scary. And Sophie, I'm going to come back to you here. How do you think that, what features do we need to see from a digital euro for it to be popular with consumers and especially elderly people?
User friendliness and inclusiveness, as Agustin was saying, includes free of charge services. The core services should be free of charge. If you want then to add on some functionalities that your PSP is offering and you ask very specific services, that's fine. You can be charged a small fee for that if there are some customers that want to have the cherry on the cake, as we say. But be aware that if high fees are charged to merchants, at the end of the day, who is going to pay for them? It's the customers, because the merchants have no other choice than reflect that on the price of the products and services that they sell. So this is something, if we want to really push for a quick take-up, that should be a crucial point, making it free for the consumers to use it, making it as cheap as possible for the merchants to adopt it and offer it to customers, and make sure that it remains in such way for the core functions. Because otherwise, if we go for the most attractive model, like the nicest, fastest car, it will be attractive to some of the customers, a small number of the population actually who can afford it, who are interested for their own reasons to have such a public digital payment means. But it's going to leave aside those who are not finding the instruments they need today. So the gap will rather increase than decrease. So financial inclusion means indeed having a way to make it as cheap as possible for the users, and by users I mean both the consumers and the merchants.
I'm going to come back to Jan and then Ellie with the same question. How are you going to boost take-up of this thing?
Well, I think first of all, as I think already was already said quite a number of times, indeed, the digital euro will be used if people think it provides some added value. I think from our side, we are proposing a certain number of features which, let's say, where we think added value can be provided. I think ECB is working on let's say, some of the other features. And ultimately, I think there will also be a role here then for the payment service providers to play. I think from our side, the features we are indeed, and we can actually regulate actually on the let's say, introduce on the regulatory side, are certainly a high confidence in the protection of data and a high level of privacy, which can be indeed, depending on the solution, for offline solutions comparable to cash. Indeed, I think we can indeed require, and we discussed that before, a product which is accessible indeed to all different parts of the population. I think that is something which legislation can also do. Those are just two examples where I think regulation can be useful indeed to also underpin this trust, because people, well, the ECB may say we don't tinker with your data, but then people say, well, how can I believe the ECB? And so that's where indeed then, of course, having a law which requires the ECB to do that even though the ECB would probably have done it anyway, but I think it provides additional confidence. If then the law in addition says, okay, the European Data Protection Supervisor is tasked to monitor this actually, that of course again provides additional. So I think that's examples where the regulator can come in, but very clearly we also know, let's say that in the end, whether to use something or not, it also depends on its convenience and then practical implication, and it depends that it actually covers the use cases which people want, whether that's peer-to-peer, whether that's in shops, but also whether that's innovative use cases. So that's clearly something which the ECB will have to work then to make the different use cases actually also work in practice. And it requires then indeed that the banks also indeed make it indeed available in reality and also practically actually accessible in a way. And I think that's then going to be the part for the banking sector. And again, that's also why indeed a certain amount of, let's say, also economic incentives indeed for the banking and the payment sector actually are quite.
And Ellie, same question.
Right. So here, allow me maybe to answer it in a different way. It's kind of interesting, and important to see how, regulators and policymakers are now designing, a commercial product more or less. So it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to function, I would say, in practice. That's why I think, the most important part that would make a success. Sorry for repeating myself here, is to see how much consumers are going, to adopt this. So this is really key in terms of not having a product that no one is going to use. I think this would be the worst outcome possible for everyone. I'll just mention another idea that I'm hearing from some MEPs we're talking to. And here, for these MEPs, and then again, now the discussion, as you know, is ongoing in the European Parliament. For them, they wish actually to disintermediate, PSPs, and they were saying, why don't we, why doesn't the ECB propose or distribute, the digital euro directly to consumers? And this way, this would be the most efficient way possible. And I think this is a bit, we haven't discussed this yet on this panel, this issue. Well, it doesn't seem to be what the ECB has in mind, or how the Commission has proposed the legislation there. But yeah, again, what would happen if the Parliament would go in this direction? I don't know if that's something really positive for the economy. But again, I wanted just to throw this idea, and maybe the others can comment also on it.
If anyone wants to weigh in there. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands going, but yeah.
Well, I mean, we can. I think this is, of course, a key question in a way. To what extent is the digital currency, a public digital currency, also there to fundamentally change the financial system? And I think there are different views on this. I think we are, of course, I mean, this is now a democratic legislative discussion. So we will, let's say, of course, listen and also interact with all the different views, let's say, expressed there. And I think we are more at the start of the discussion. I think the only thing I would say is that those who actually favor indeed, let's say, a much stronger role indeed of the digital euro beyond just the means of payment and beyond something to be distributed privately. First of all, I think one needs to see, is the public sector really going to be able to actually do it and to do it operationally? Because in the end, people have public products which basically are much less convenient to use than private products. Then I'm not sure. I mean, the majority of Europeans would be wanting to do it. So I think that one needs to be really sure about, that the public sector can really do it better. And the second point one will then need to discuss is indeed what is the impact on the role of the financial sector now, not only in the payment systems, but also, of course, in its financing of the economy. I mean, there are concepts on this, but the more you change, the more you see this as a fundamental change, the more you also then need to, of course, carefully reflect all the implications of this, which this has. So that's why I think from the Commission side, we started off, and our proposal actually is not only a start, but also indeed it sets up the digital euro as, let's say, indeed mainly above all as a means of payment, and as a means of payment indeed distributed above all by the private sector. Because we maybe don't think that at this stage, or let's say that there is a case which has been made, a good case that indeed we need fundamental change actually of our financial system, and that a public solution could do it fundamentally better, basically. So I think change probably, there are many things we're also not happy with in the financial sector. But let's say whether the public, let's say, looking at some of the experiences also in Europe, whether indeed public, let's say, actors could necessarily do it better, that's something where we maybe have the doubts.
Yeah, and Sophie.
Yes, I just want to draw a parallel with cash. Cash is public money. It's the liabilities with the euro system, but it is distributed through private PSPs, mostly.
Perfect, thank you. Ellie, I think you might have confused some of our audience when you started talking about individual and multiple wallets. We've had a question saying, what does multiple wallets mean? And I think this feeds into an interesting point about what are the forms of use of a potential digital euro going to look like? How will people be interacting with this thing in future? Are you going to go to the post office to get it? Is it going to be a card? Is it going to be an app? Is the app going to be run by the ECB or by your bank? What are your thoughts on the features that you're looking for here?
So you want me to start with this one, right?
I want you to start by explaining what single and multiple wallets are, and then I want you to say what you want from the forms of use of the digital euro.
Right. So think about it more like with an example from today. So today, let's say, I mean, without mentioning any particular wallet, let's say you have one wallet and then you have different means of payments that you could use in that wallet. Yeah. So you could have different, maybe cards, you could have, also your bank account, and then you use whatever method you want from that wallet. So this is a bit the same model. We hope like this would be replicated when it comes to the digital euro. So it wouldn't be just with one bank. Let's say if you're using your digital euro, I don't know, with Fortis, for instance, that would be it. You should be able to use it maybe with Fortis, maybe also with KBC if you're in Belgium, or with Santander, but also maybe with, I don't know, with American Express, or with any other provider other than that. So the possibility to use it with multiple providers, different products under, the same limit that you could have. So it's really similar to what you would have today, let's say, within your PayPal account with different funding methods.
And Agustin, I'm going to come back to you here, talking about the forms of use and the different really shape that a digital euro could have. What are you looking for here from the consumer perspective? What's going to make this accessible to people?
I think that what we need to look at is how consumers are interacting today with electronic means of payment. And a reality is that physical payment cards are still a preferred use of payment. There is a study by the ECB, the ECB Space Study, that actually shows that cards are used for the majority of online payments, up to 51%, and 34% of the transaction and the POS are made with a card. So still, the digital euro needs to be able to function with a cards-based system. And that, of course, doesn't imply not looking at other options. And certainly, giving more options to consumers, it's a good thing, because then they will be able to adopt the digital euro in the way that they consider to be most appropriate and helpful. So certainly, mobile applications will play a role. There is a discussion that needs to be had about who is going to develop that, because whoever develops that also has the liability over what's happening if the application doesn't work well. But indeed, I think that here we need to really think about giving as many choices as possible. Also, what is important, including in the case of physical payment cards, the possibility to load the digital euros in your card so that you can use it and then pay like I say, because it's not exactly the same as you will pay with cash. Those are in Belgium. Probably remember a system was called Proton, that you could actually load your money there to buy your kind of small things. And certainly that was something that was widely used. So we could foresee a similar system. So on the wallets and application, whether there will be multiple wallets will be developed by the different banks. That's of course another question, but in this regard, interoperability will be fundamental, because what you want to ensure is that you can also facilitate and enable peer-to-peer transactions free of charge, clearly, as one of the basic functions. And for that, interoperability will be super important.
Jan, any thoughts here on the forms of use? And I think in particular, what kind of trade-offs are legislators going to need to be taking into consideration when they're deciding how people will be interacting with these things?
I think most of the points I think you have been made. I think I can agree pretty much with what Agustin and Eddie also said on this. So, nothing particular to add from our side.
Okay, let's talk about privacy. This is obviously a huge consumer concern when we're talking about the digital euro, particularly with elections coming up next year. I'll come straight back to you, Jan. When we're thinking about the digital euro, we've heard pleas for it to have privacy inbuilt, privacy by design. What are the key considerations and the key features we need to be looking at to embed that kind of privacy for consumers?
Yeah, I think that is something on which we spent a lot of time when we prepared our legislative proposal, because that indeed, as I mentioned, is something where the legislation has also a guarantee function. And we've also worked a lot indeed with our, let's say, privacy colleagues here in the European Commission. You have maybe seen that also now the European Data Protection Board has indeed issued an opinion on the proposal, where they make, let's say, a number of additional proposals. So I think generally the basic underlying, let's say, principle is that the euro should really have the objective to, let's say, to limit as much as possible, indeed, to be designed privacy by design, as you said it, in a way to limit as much as possible the flow of private data actually in design. And I think there are two sensitivities here. Not everybody has the same. Some people are particularly worried that indeed the central banks access their data and would develop some kind of surveillance mechanisms, and others basically are particularly worried that commercial banks, that they shouldn't access too much of their data basically. And I think we've tried to actually, as much as possible, provide some comfort on both sides. Having said this, of course, let's say any kind of payment system, and even actually a payment system based on cash, by the way, needs some data to flow, otherwise it doesn't work. I mean, even when you go to the ATM, the bank knows that you have withdrawn 100 euros, and maybe the ATM provider knows it as well, and maybe others as well. So I think it is about, let's say, recognizing that to pay, there is a minimum of data which needs to flow basically here and there. But indeed to try to really use the state of the art, both in terms of GDPR and privacy enhancing designs, and also technology indeed actually to limit this as much as possible. And so I think indeed then we get into a situation where when you would indeed use the specific offline device, the offline version of the digital euro, indeed your bank would be actually, the ECB would not see any of your personal data. The bank would see, of course, that you're loading 100 euros up to your offline device, but indeed it would not see, the commercial bank would not see, unlike for current digital means of payment, would not see what actually you spend your money for. And then in a way, so you have really a privacy which is comparable to cash. The last item, of course, where the data needs to flow, is not only about making the payment possible, but it's indeed also to make sure that our financial system as a whole is not used for money laundering purposes and terrorism financing. And I think that's where here and there certain, let's say, well, I mean, we have a quite comprehensive monitoring system in place, which has also proven to be quite useful in a way. In the past, is proving today quite useful, for example, also to ensure the application of sanctions in a number of cases. I think we have proposed rules which would indeed also in principle apply the system indeed to the digital euro. But again, while ensuring that especially for small amounts for offline solutions, there is no specific monitoring of individual transactions. So I think those are a bit the key considerations. This is one of the most difficult balancing acts indeed, or one of the most difficult points. I think for us, there must not be any compromise actually on privacy. But I think everybody who works with privacy and data protection knows that this is, I mean, it's all about indeed necessity of data processing. It's all about proportionality and about seeing, well, how can we actually make this the least intrusive possible? And I think that's where, for example, the European Data Protection Board also has maybe given a couple of additional, let's say, elements and ideas, and I think they are now on the table for public discussion and for discussion by the legislature.
Agustin, I know you want to come in here. I was coming to you next anyway, but you've anticipated me.
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't resist. Of course, I totally agree with Jan. I think that here what we're talking is basically taking the principle of data minimization to an extreme to a certain extent, because of course, as I said before, if we want to replicate the experience of paying with cash as much as possible, anonymity is fundamental within the acceptable limits. I would like actually to bring one element, of course, for offline transaction. I think that here is about defining lighter onboarding and limited data storage. But of course, what happened with online transaction, and there is a very interesting idea that was floated by the ECB. It's called the anonymity vouchers, which would allow to transfer a limited amount of digital euros, over a defined period of time, and that could be actually an approach that could be taken as well. Certainly, when we're talking about significant amounts above a certain threshold, then the discussion is slightly different because of anti-money laundering proceedings. But I think that we will the next phase on the design of this delivery will have to really consider this aspect, because this is one of the elements that is going to be a differentiating factor with other existing electronic means of payments, and that will be, to put it very bluntly, a selling point of the digital euro when it comes to online transactions.
Ellie, industry is clearly going to be very involved when it comes to rolling out a privacy regime. What are your thoughts on this? What do we need to see in terms of privacy?
Well, I think this is a key aspect, also politically. Allow me to start there. I mean, I know when we hear like some of the debates, they could seem most of the time not reasonable or just maybe, having some conspiracy theories. But I think this is very important, again, not to, I'm going back to my point, like to have the most and the biggest adoption possible. Should just make sure that people are not afraid for whatever concern, to use the digital euro. And I think, also as an industry, we have, we have the trust normally of our users. And then that's I think also an additional value, maybe, also for consumers to use private institutions, because they have their data, their payments data with these, financial institutions in general. And then maybe they would trust it more than a public authority. I don't know. That's a question. Probably, I don't know, Augustine could tell what consumers think. But that's definitely, something in certain countries that could help, to have also the private institutions there.
Augustine, did you want to come in there?
Again, on each particular solution, I think that we need to want a much closer scrutiny. Not comment necessarily on what are the appropriate technologies to be used, to be honest. But I think that all alternatives, should be carefully considered. Sorry to give you a non-answer, but I prefer not to comment on something that I'm not 100% sure about.
Anne-Sophie, also anticipating.
Yes. Now, I just wanted to highlight from an older person's perspective, it will be crucial that the digital euro will not only feel safe or be sold as a safe product with your data very well protected, but will deliver on data protection. Privacy is very important, might not be as important for some older persons who are unfortunately too much used to hand over their credentials and their credit cards or bank cards to a third party because they cannot cope with their banking needs on their own due to the lack of accessibility of the devices. But they would certainly be very, very interested to have a product that will be really safe, because we know and we hear that every day that data is being stolen, even from PSPs, and it can be coming from another actor. It can be a hospital, it can be a hotel, it can be, but this means that once the data is circulating, it can really be very damaging for the consumer. So that's data protection, I would say, and of course, not having the system hacked by or used for money laundering or terrorist financing is a very key aspect for for our group of consumers.
Yeah, and you and Jan have both raised the interesting point that we are essentially trying to strike a balance here between staving off money laundering and terrorist financing versus protecting consumer privacy. Jan, I'm going to come back to you here if you can talk about this in any more detail. How do you find that balance? And Sophie, I'll come back to you afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much not a balance yet. You can say it's a balancing act. I don't like to talk about the balancing act because it is not about, let's say, seeing, well, I mean, we do less data protection, and I mean, data protection is not an absolute, let's say, an absolute value in the sense that it is not the less data flows, the better it is. Basically, consumers are quite willing actually for data to flow, and that's part of our daily life. Basically, I think. It is about the optimal level of data flows, basically, and I think that's exactly the case here as well. And the optimal minimal level of data flow. And I think when you come to money laundering, I mean, I think and terrorism financing issues, it is clear that nobody, no consumer, and certainly no central bank would like the euro to become a vehicle, let's say, for these kind of illicit activities. And that means that we will need to take, let's say, do quite solid and serious risk analysis here in a way. And I think that is something on which we, let's say, and then on that basis, we need to see in a way where can we draw lines, where does how much data need to flow, basically, and where can we really have a safe haven where we can really tell people, okay, no data flows at all. I think we have for the time being identified that indeed, let's say, offline use, where indeed you need to be present, both payer and payee need to be present physically in the same situation, is something which has clearly a lower money laundering risk than on online transactions, because online transactions, clearly you can actually transfer funds actually across Europe, across the globe, maybe even. So there clearly is much higher potential here. And that's why we have said, okay, we're confident to say that below a certain value, indeed, for offline transactions, there is no transaction monitoring necessary, basically. I think that's one example of trying indeed to make a concrete assessment of what are the necessary data flows and where do they maybe stop. Now, I think the discussion that we're having, and Agustin, you pointed to that a bit as well, is in general, actually, if you have small amounts, you have a certain budget, where basically the risks are generally lower. I think that's something where if you speak to indeed AML experts, basically they normally have a bit of a, let's say, a concern, because of course many small amounts together can also, let's say, amount to big amounts. So, but I think that is definitely a discussion which is right now taking place in the legislative sphere, and I think it is also something in which I expect a lot of discussion to take place. And ultimately, this is a choice which the legislator needs to take. It's the legislator who needs to decide how much data actually must flow. Where do we see the risks? How do we want to actually? How much risk do we want to actually also accept? That's what the legislator has to decide.
Okay, I'm going to come back to Anne-Sophie.
Sorry, no, I think I forgot to lower my hand. But just to conclude on that, this is this issue of. Well, I like the way Jan was presenting it. It's not a trade-off. It should be optimal. In both aspects should be optimal, and it will evolve over time. And it's not only going to concern the digital euro only. It is for any digital means. So the more we do on fraud prevention, the more we learn how to anticipate potential risks, and the more we share information, because this is where we are lacking for the moment. There is a lower consumer protection because the information about frauds and incidents like that is not shared enough. So that's something I hope is going to improve as well, and will benefit the digital euro as well as the other private digital payment instruments, because they should complement each other and offer the highest protection possible.
Yeah, Agustin.
Yeah, I just want to bring one element. We are not anti-money laundering experts. So what is the magic amount? But something that, like Jan said, will be for the legislator to decide where do they set the bar at the end of the day. But I think that something that we also need to keep into consideration is that the digital euro is not meant to be an investment instrument. So there is no benefit per se for the consumer to have a lot of money in a digital euro account. in any case. So I think this is something that also will and should play into a discussion, because if you have a lot of money parked, we'll rather keep it in a saving account, even if the interest rates are painfully low, and that's a separate discussion. We can have an entire webinar on that, but certainly not in a digital euro account. So I think that this is something that an element that will play into consideration when we look at consumer behavior toward the digital euro.
Great, thank you. We are running out of time, so I want to close with one kind of broad question for all of the panelists, if we can just do a quick response. The title of the panel is Design Choices and Trade-offs. I would just like to ask very generally, in your view, does the design that's been proposed for the digital euro live up to its potential? I'm going to come to Ellie first, because we haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, no, for me, again, it could only work if the fee structure is right. So then, the private sector has incentives also, to build and innovate around the digital euro. If not, you will end up with a basic service that is very basic, and not sure how many people are going to use it. This is what we truly believe in.
Perfect. And Sophie, same question.
My answer will be very short. Yes, and we should keep the proposal as it is. Thank you.
Agustin.
Again, I think the basis is there, and it's a very good basis that the Commission put forward. The work of the ECB is going in the right direction. Again, the difficult choices will be made on all these questions that we discussed today. And I think they are the success of the digital euro from the consumer, the citizen perspective will depend on its design. It is going to be an instrument for the payments industry to make more money, or will be something truly designed to look at the future of cash. And I think that the second option is the one that will be closer to consumers' interest.
And Jan, you might be biased here, but I'll give you the final word. Does the digital euro live up to its potential?
I think, let's say, what we have currently on the table is basically, is probably from the Commission's perspective a good basis. But having said this, I think this is a complex project. So I think over the time, let's say, of the legislative process, we certainly hope and expect it to be further improved in a way. And I think we really need to, let's say, carefully think through that this is indeed a project where ultimately it is to the benefit of all, let's say, the various, let's say, stakeholders, ultimately to the consumers. But there's also in something for all, let's say, the people who are necessary to make this work, the merchants, the PSPs, the banks, the non-banks, and others, basically. Because if that's not the case, then it will not work. And I think we can probably on all those elements, I think probably we can even further improve, because it is a quite complex product, and we certainly we should not stop learning and improving.
Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists for your time and effort, and to the audience for the dedication. That's all from me. I think we have some closing remarks from Benoit now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Catherine, and thanks indeed to all the panelists. I won't be long. As a citizen, I learned a lot. This is not the area where I have most expertise. I want to thank for sure all of the distinguished panelists of the first panel, the second panel, the moderators for I found a very high quality discussion, and very sort of constructive and related to the facts. We see I think this counterbalance the level of negativity, I might say, in the public discussion around the digital euro. Let's face it, I mean, we all have access to mainstream media. We see that negativity. We actually believe, and again, you can check the Finance Watch paper written by Christian, A Matter of Trust on our website. You've heard the opinions of many different stakeholders. Today, we do think actually, again, as I said, money is a public good. It's been provided and controlled by the state on behalf of citizens. That's been a consensus for 150 years. With the advance of electronic payments, the expense of cash, this has been eroded. The situation has been eroded. We've seen the emergence of dominant private players. Some would say oligopolies, such as bank-owned payment networks, international card firms, the GAFAs lately. And so, in our view, the digital euro reasserts the role of public money by updating cash for the digital age, no more, no less. And so then it's still very much for the private sector to find new and genuinely value-added services to wrap around it. So for us, that's really the situation. But again, I can only encourage, frankly, all of you, including the panelists, to keep promoting these sorts of public interest-oriented, rational discussion, because I'm afraid to say, and I've mentioned there was an industry report that came up this morning, which is very much rehashing some arguments from the private sector, pushing back on the private euro because they have, again, we have this oligopoly in financial services in general, to be really frank, in the payment sector in general. And so I'm also afraid to say these people, although they don't say it, sort of team up with some of the populist arguments, which are borderline conspiracy theories. And so it's not one or the other. These people team up to push back on something that can be a really value-enhancing project for citizens, and an opportunity, I think, for European leadership to show they can innovate and defending public interest in policymaking, which, again, I'm afraid to say, having been with Finance Watch for 12 years, has not always been the case if you look at some of the ongoing discussions. I won't mention the files because it's going to be long and very specific, but we know the industry usually manages to have its ways go through the different arcanes, and to be blunt, it's usually not the Commission or the Parliament, but it's at the last minute that our friends, EU leaders, make sure that the interests of the national champions prevail. We really hope it's not going to be the case for this one, and I think this was a really nice and balanced way to present the case for the digital euro. And again, much thanks to my colleagues for organizing this, including Christian, who's leading our work on this, but also all the panelists and the moderators for a very entertaining discussion. Please stay tuned. Make sure you are subscribed to our newsletter for more interesting events like this one, and see you soon. Thanks a lot.